Yeah.
Hi,
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the B2B Forum pre-event online bootcamp. So we are thrilled to have you both here in this session on developing the market-ready project and mastering the art of pitching. So we are thrilled to have two industry experts leading today's session. Ken Anderson, who is the producer and executive producer of Isongo Limited, a multi-award winning producer with over 30 years in the animation, film and TV industry. Ken has worked on hit series like The Brilliant World of Tom Getz, 64 Zoo Lane and Dennis uh, Nasher. A BAFTA voting member, Ken is a key figure in shaping the future of animation. We have Meg Anderson, who is the founder of Isongo Limited with 20 years of experience, and she has worked with top creative organizations like BBC, Aardman, Netflix, Disney, specializing in virtual pitching, leadership, and team effectiveness. She also helps in creative professionals refine their communication and pitching skills to maximize their impact. So today's session will cover two areas. First, Ken Anderson will walk us through the process of developing a market ready concept covering everything from breaking creative barriers, securing rights, assembling a creative team of funding, production, and distribution. And then Meg Anderson will dive into effective pitching both in person and virtual, sharing key strategies to engage buyers, structure meetings, and build meaningful connections. So we have an exciting sessions ahead. So let's get started. Over to you, Ken.
thanks.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. I'm Ken. Meg and I are a couple. We're married, and as with all great marriages, Meg's currently in South Africa, and I'm in Scotland. So that's how you keep the love alive. Um, I'm going to now move into the sort of. I'll put up my presentation for you and share that screen and run through it very quickly. Um, and I'm going to just do that now and keep my fingers crossed that it works. so, um, and just if you can just, hopefully you'll be able to see that building blocks for developing and producing animation. Um, and this is an image here from the Tom Gates show. I just, there we are. That's me. Um, so I was previously, I've come into this sector as a business person, really, and from banking, and have set up various companies across the years, and always looking at opportunities and looking for new businesses. And so I've got a broad experience in the sector. Um, the agenda today, from my perspective, in terms of what I'm going to talk about, is this high level view of development and production flow. So you'll see, from the very beginning, initial ideas or initial properties all the way through to the very end, and understand that we've got various people here, some coming from the comic sector, from games, from toys, and licensing and merchandising. So some of this will relate to you all because either you're a rights owner who's trying to look at how to exploit your rights, or maybe you're looking at someone exploiting your rights, or you're looking to acquire rights. So, this is all part of the whole process that we have in terms of audiovisual content production. You might be in games as well, and looking at how do you take that through that process of development and realization and exploitation. So, it's a very quick run through, and I really talk about some of the key areas to bear in mind. But this is just really a taste and a snapshot. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to come to the GAFX event and really immerse yourself into the world and meet lots of different people with skills and experience that can share with you. Um, so here we are. This is the animation flow production. So as you can tell, I'm not an animator, but here's a little bit of a run through. And as I said, the first stage is IDing the property of the idea. So that could be a book. Many people use books as a source of inspiration, partly because there's a knowledge already of that. But these days, it can be anything. It could be something like a YouTuber. It could be a game. It could be a comic. So really, the inspiration for the idea can be anything. Then you need to secure those rights. You need to absolutely make sure that you have them. Otherwise, you're in danger of causing yourself problem further down the line. And securing rights is one of these key areas to really bear in mind and understand. If you don't secure them, you're in danger of being in having a difficult time later. Then you're adapting these rights. So, you don't just take what's in the book and just present it using AI into a script. You know, that's not actually how it works. So, what you need to do is you actually need to adapt the content. You bring in creators, writers, screenwriters to help you do that. Or if you're a writer, creator yourself, you work with others to help you do that. So then you move into the stage of sales materials and proof of concept. So these are the things the tools that help you to sell with. And Meg's going to talk to you about the pitch process, which is really again the point at which you move into contact with other people. And depends on who you are, you're always going to be pitching, right? You're always going to be pitching to people. You're going to be pitching, if you're a writer, to a producer or a director, so that you get them excited about your idea and they want to take it up. Or if you're a director or a producer, you're pitching the idea to somebody else to get them to give you money to take this forward. So everybody keeps on pitching, and even the producers are pitching to the broadcasters, they're pitching to the distributors, and the distributors are pitching, and so on and so on and so on. We're always pitching. So these pitching skills that Meg's going to talk about are really, really important. Then you establish your partnerships, and as I mentioned, these could be writers with directors and directors and writers with producers, and so on and so on. Then you're pre-selling the concept and approach. So you're actually going into people, and before you spend any money, serious money, I mean, because you'll have to spend some just to get yourself ready. You try and sell this idea and get yourself comfortable that there's enough interest that you should continue to pursue your goal, which is to get this produced and then sold. Then the funding of the production. So that's an important part. How do you do that? So each of these areas are just a huge amount of work to go through and learn about and explore in themselves. So as we say, these are just kind of points of learning and experience to be gained. And we'll move on to the next one. Pre-production, as many of you have in your own sectors, whether you're comics or games or animation and film, you have this pre-production phase where you're trying to get all the things that you want to get ready for the production itself, and get them signed off and approved, and then you actually go into the production and the delivery phase. And depending on the scale of the production that you're involved in, this can involve a few people, or it can involve hundreds of people. So there's a lot of management and technical challenges within that. Then the important part is, once you've made something, you have to get it out there into the world. And that's the distribution and promotion side of things. There's really, what's the point of having made something if nobody ever sees it? So that's really another really vital part of this in terms of reaching your audience. And then the afterlife, the L&M, or licensing and merchandising, the spin-offs, the untold riches that you will then receive because you've become so famous, and your brand is so incredibly famous. And there are many examples of this. And within India, you might look at Green Gold and Chota Beam, and how successful that property has been. And that came out of the head of Rajiv Chilaka, and he has turned that into an incredible property. And I'm sure you'll find others yourselves. So that's that. So looking at the building blocks, and I think if you've got any questions, please just put them into the chat, and we'll try and come back to those at the end and answer those as best we can, or we'll try and capture them some other way afterwards. So I think if you don't mind, I'll just sort of rattle through this so that we can get to Megan and the good stuff about pitching. So rights, intellectual property is something you create using your mind. This is the definition of the UK government, and generally the international world standards is that if you created it with your mind, it's intellectual property. So that throws into question the whole thing of AI, right? But that's a completely different discussion for another time. They provide legal protections for creators and without fear of unauthorized use or replication. So these are the things that you get when you create something with your mind and you write it down or you draw it. And there are still protections that you want to have, but in terms of securing these rights, you need to get them from the person that created them in the first place. And that also means the people that are working for you. So if you are, you need to ensure that those rights are assigned to you or to your company so that you can have them in the future. So this is also something to be wary of. That it's great having friends who work for you, and it's great having colleagues who work for you and help you, but you need to make sure that you find a way to capture that they have agreed to transfer their rights in what they've created to you. Okay. And the rights can be shared. You can license these rights once you've created them. And so, you know, there are ways of doing this. But again, you need good advice. You need a lawyer to help you with this, or you need an experienced person who's done this before. So, but that's now we'll move on to creative and technical. So writing is a really important part of the process within animation, and animators need to find writers and editors to help them with their work. So I don't know how many people on this call are actually animators, but I know from experience that actually those people who've dedicated themselves to being script writers are the people that you as creative business people need to find. You need to find those people who can actually write scripts, because that's what they devote themselves to, and they understand story, they understand character, they understand pacing, and so find the ones that are suitable for the audience that you are trying to target, and find the ones that are right for the medium that you're operating in. So if you are a games company, you want to find a writer who understands games, and you want to find a writer who understands the kind of genre that you're working in, for example. So if you're doing horror games, find somebody who really loves horror and who can write for a horror audience and who knows and plays horror games and has a real passion for it. Visual development. What does a good look like in that? You know, so again, you're looking for that sort of the look that suits the audience that you're going for, and that actually you can produce, and it's right for the market. So, you know, Disney can afford to really go way over the top in terms of design and execution of their designs and their visuals. Whereas if you don't have so much resource available to you, you've really got to try and think smart about how you design around the issues of your finances or your ambition. So you've got to really take a clear-eyed view on what you're trying to do, your audience, what they like, what they'll accept. So don't over-design a preschool property, for example. Try and be smart around that, and try and look at using design as a way to really give you an extra boost when it comes to the visual representation. And again, looking at the techniques and the form that you're going to use, there are so many different ways to produce content, and you know, and many of you, some of you are using, I'm sure, software such as real-time rendering softwares and so on to help speed you up. You're using built-in assets that they've got. So there's the things that you have access to that determine how you produce this content. But again, you're trying to find the one that is most suitable for your audience in terms of, you know, the age of the audience. Also, you're looking for the best way to render or to create, and the look of what you're trying to achieve. And also, you've got to bear in mind how much it costs to produce, and so, you know, you might choose to go low tech because actually it meets the needs of your audience. It's cheap to produce. There are lots of people who know how to use the softwares that you have in mind, and it's actually going to be a budget that you can afford to produce. So these are the questions that if you're putting a producer's idea or producer's head on, if you want a hat on, even you might say, okay, I need to try and really work out the technique and not to over design or to over kind of produce some piece of work that doesn't really, you'll never get the budget or you'll never meet the audience. So you've got to be careful about how you choose your technique and again, think about the design. So sources of funding, I'm going to run through this. There are many, believe it or not, but there are challenges, obviously, of trying to secure funding, and the bigger your budget, the harder that becomes. And so let me go into that. So friends, family, and fools. This is you'll always hear this about investment. Whenever you're trying to start some venture, these are the people that you'll tend to go to, so that's if you're starting out, that often is the way. Then, of course, government, and there's lots of great positive news in India about funding through the government, local agencies, states. So you just need to explore those with your local funding agencies to see what sources of funding are available, particularly at the developmental stage. That's the really hard part, is the initial stage of development. So try and map out the different sources of funding available to you across your local, state, and national government, or in your cities even. So have a look at those and try and plot out how much money is available to you, and use that as part of your financing plan. Screen agencies, again, if you have them in your locality or it's your state, there will be agencies who are helping with specifically looking at your sector and trying to support you. So have a look at those. They're possibly evolving in India more and more, but yeah, try and tap into all the networks of agencies and networks of actual practitioners who are doing work, and companies that are working. So, for example, GAFX is a fantastic place to be connected into and networking with people that can provide you with that sort of information. And then, yes, you've got the international side of things. Now, there may be incentives and there may be funding through national or international organizations who are trying to support, for example, the British Council supports projects between the UK and India. So there are opportunities through agencies such as those, which are about international cultural relations, and have a look at them and try and work out these things, because it could be France or Germany or Spain or Canada, that they're looking to try and do cultural development between the countries, and so there could be sources of funding in those areas. Then broadcasters and studios, streamers and networks, both locally and internationally. So I would say that this can be really difficult money to get, but again, there may be incentives initiatives that are happening within those broadcasters and platforms and streamers who are trying to encourage local content producers, who are trying to encourage new ideas. And so it's one of these things of just keeping your eyes open and your ears open to opportunities that are around you, because they do come up. There are competitions, for example, there are pitching sessions and things like this. So always keep your eyes and ears open just to the possibility that these guys are actively looking for projects and talent, and put yourself into the fray. And then internal co-productions, and these are relationships which you basically build between suppliers within your city, your state, or within the country, and maybe even internationally, where you're looking for people to do work for you on a sort of investment basis. They're helping you to achieve the outcome by investing into your property. They believe in you, believe in property, and they see it as a good use of their time and resource. They may have downtime, and so they're willing to give a bit of sweat equity for their position in the property if they believe in it. And again, that's about you pitching into people and convincing them that this is something worthwhile doing. So finally, do not invest your own money, right? Um, there are many stories of people who've taken loans or mortgaged their house or crazy things. You always hear about the successes. You never hear about the failures, right? And the successes are very, very, very few. So it's such a temptation to put lots of money of your own into these projects, but really resist that because it's not. It really isn't the best way to go about doing this. You might want to develop multiple projects. Are you going to keep putting multiple amounts of your own money into that? Then that's not sustainable and realistic. So you are going to fail, right? These projects are not going to be, everyone you develop will not be successful. So you really have to be smart about how you go about putting money into projects and be very, very careful about how you use your resources. Partners, we touched on those, and they're basically all the ones I mentioned to you there. These people are actually your potential partners for the future. So don't burn bridges is probably my best advice. These guys are going to help. Like the jigsaw puzzle over there. They're pieces in the puzzle that will all eventually come together to make whatever it is that you choose to do. So whether it's a film, it's a TV series, it's a special, it's a game. These are all different partners that you want to retain and keep on side for the future. So, you've got to think carefully about that and in terms of your relationships with those people and how you maintain them over time. Because one day you might be looking for a partner and there's somebody you met 20 years ago and they suddenly turn out to be the absolute key and the linchpin for what you're trying to do. And if you kept on good terms with them, then that's a positive. But don't put yourself in a situation where you've burnt that bridge, and that prevents you from closing a financing position or opening a door that you need to. So let's have a look. And of course, the talent, because talent is really in many forms. That's writers, directors, other producers. These are the people who bring their skills, their talents to you and to the project and transform it and really make it something special. And so, again, keeping talent on side and having good relationships with those is really vitally important, particularly a producer or a director. You really, really, that's important. So, and in our world, that could be a designer, or it could be a rigger or a modeler. They could be the people who are really talented and that you keep your eye on and keep a good relationship with because you never know when they might be needed in the future. And the media, you've got to try and build those relationships with the media because they're the people who are going to be providing you with information or provide you with an opportunity to have a megaphone to get your message out into the world. And if they like you and they want to help you, then they'll always be there when you need them. And you just, again, have to manage that relationship with them and keep them on side and allow you the opportunity to get your message out into the world. Similarly, festivals and events organizers, they're people who will invite you to GAFX or to other festivals to screen your films or to talk about your project. And so they're hugely important people in the ecosystem of our world because they're often the first place that you get an opportunity to present and talk to people and build those relationships. They're the kind of safe space in which you can do this, right? And so those event organizers are wonderful people who are there. Their whole purpose is to try and make your future success a possibility. And so, those are the kind of people that really understand the process of trying to open up things to the world, and they understand that process. And that's me. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to the very lovely Megan. And as I said, if you've got any questions, please do pop them into the chat box and we can try and capture those at some point in the future. That's me, Megs.
Thank you, Ken. And hello, everyone. I'm going to get my slides up now. Let's see. just talk through. So in this part, as Ken has mentioned, we're going to begin with, and I'm going to ask you a question. So start thinking about this now, is what do you find challenging when it comes to pitching? So you all will have done pitches before. As Ken said, we pitch all the time. What do you particularly find challenging when it comes to pitching? And what I'd love you to do is to enter that into the chat while we go. Next, I'm going to look at the key stages of a pitch. So if we break a pitch down into key stages, there are some really important things that should be happening at each stage. And I'm going to run through a few key pointers there for you to think about. And we're going to be beginning with the first stage, which is preparing, right? Often pitches fail because of this step. This step does not happen. And so I'm going to give you a checklist of things to consider. And the next stage we look at is opening a pitch. The very beginning of a pitch is super important. So what are some best practices, principles that are really key to getting yourself off to a good start? Running the pitch, so the actual pitch and what's happening there. And some, obviously, this is a huge topic we could spend a week on, the actual pitch event, and then closing a pitch. What should happen at the end? So do go ahead and type into the chat, what specifically do you find challenging? What do you find challenging when it comes to pitching? So let's see, we've got some in here. Maintaining the relationship after the pitch is over. Brilliant. That can be very challenging. How to convince that will generate revenue. Market fit model. Absolutely. Toughest, finding a proper person to pitch to. Yeah, really. All very, very good challenges. So do keep those coming as we go through this. So I'm going to begin with something that underpins whether you are pitching virtually, so online, which many of us are doing these days, or whether you are pitching face to face. And it's something that a lot of the time we don't think about. But one of the biggest goals when you are pitching is to establish trustworthiness. You want the person or the company or the distributor, the co-producer, whoever it might be, the funder, but you want to be building trustworthiness with them. You want them to consider you as trustworthy. And so I want to introduce to you a really interesting model that allows us to think about this and think about how you come across as an individual and as a company. David Maister was someone who took this quite abstract concept of trust and he broke it down through lots of research to look at what are the fundamental elements of establishing trust. And he came up with this called the trust equation. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to upload these slides into the chat so that you can take them away with you. He, from his research, concluded that trustworthiness was an equation that equaled credibility. So in order to establish trust, you had to demonstrate skills, knowledge, expertise in the field that you're in. So thinking about in your pitch, how are you going to get that across? How are you going to establish your credibility with the person or the group that you're pitching to? Are they going to be aware of your knowledge and your skills and your experience? And then he said, plus reliability. Now, reliability is that belief that the person is going to show up consistently and be able to reproduce that credibility. So an example of that is if the person makes a commitment, do they deliver on that commitment? If they say they're going to do something, do they follow through on that? How can I trust that they're going to show up in accordance with my expectations? Because somebody can be super credible, but if they're very inconsistent and they fail to meet my expectation, that can damage trust. So he said those two things really important. And then he said there's a third one, that even if you had both those two, you could lose trust. And the third one is one that he called intimacy. Now, intimacy might feel like a strange word, but what he meant by intimacy was warmth, openness, the human connection. How warm, how open, how emotionally available and warm is this person? So I could be super credible, super reliable, but if I appear closed or cold or distant, trust goes down. And then he discovered a really interesting thing, that you could have all three of these things, tick, 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 and all trust could be eroded by one thing. So divided by all these three things, divided by self-orientation. In other words, the degree to which this person appears to only be in it for themselves. So if I appear to be selfish in my motives, I'm not a team player, I'm not interested in you, the person I'm pitching to, I'm interested in me and my project and my thing, trust goes. And one of the reasons why I want to share this with you is because when pitching, we've got to cover all these different pieces, because we often have a very short period of time to establish trust. And if we're not able to tick each of these boxes, we can impact trust. So I begin that with really laying the foundation for how we pitch effectively. So with that in mind, I want to begin with talking about, for many of you, and do type into the chat, give me a yes if a lot of your pitching happens virtually. You've got to do, perhaps the first meeting is happening on a call, or you do that. Just type in yes so that I can kind of see how relevant this is to you. Is a lot of your pitching happening virtually? What we know is when we are trying to connect and tick those boxes that I just mentioned in the trust equation, when we're doing it in person, it is so much easier, right? We are able to read the room. We can get a sense of how people are feeling. It's much easier to change our behavior. But when we're pitching virtually, sometimes we can't even see the people we're pitching to. Like me with all of you now, I can't see any of you, and I'm needing to connect with you. But so here are some really important principles when it comes to pitching or presenting, actually, is that are really important to engage people and to build that emotional connection, that reliability, all of that. One of the things that's really important is to be more direct when you're facilitating. So, for example, me asking you, or you guys all, to enter stuff into the chat and tell me this and tell me that, and now I'm going to do this and I'm going to go through that. So we introduce a lot more structure, and we've got to actually think about making every minute count. Because when you're face to face, you may be going to get some tea together. You're going to have a little walk to the meeting room. You've got all this time to kind of establish this connection. But when you're in this virtual space, you've got a lot less time often, and it's much more focused. So you've really got to think beforehand about how you're going to run this. How much time are you going to spend? You must think about how you create the emotional connection. You'll notice at the beginning of this session, we asked you to enter in to the chat, what sector are you in? Share with us your location. That's creating an emotional connection in this crazy virtual world. It's creating, wherever we can, that human connection. So we want to capture rituals that simulate what works in the room, which we would all go around introducing ourselves. Obviously, we're a big group, so we couldn't do that here, otherwise the whole time would be gone. But we recreate that using chat, right? Because we want to create psychological safety. We want to introduce that. We want to have a few jokes, like Ken joking about his wife being in South Africa, and he feels then like a human being, right? Not just a little tiny little camera tile. So we want to encourage engagement. And you've got to really think about what you want to communicate, because your time is limited and you don't want to waste any of that time in the pitch. So those are some principles around virtual pitching. And let's now go into each of the steps. So we talk about preparing, what happens beforehand, opening, running the pitch, closing the pitch, and then another really important step that many of us don't do, which is, how did it go? We look back and we go, what worked, what didn't work, so that we can learn. And I think often we leave that out. I know I do. And we really want to make sure that we learn all the time. So the first step we're going to look at is prepare. Now, again, often in the crazy, busy hustle of life, we neglect this step. We miss the step out. And actually, I believe it's the most important step, because if you don't prepare well, then you waste that precious time. It's hard enough getting in front of people to pitch, as someone mentioned with the challenges, finding the person. But if you waste that time, then that really is a shame. So I'm going to talk about virtual preparation first, and then preparation that relates to both. Really thinking about how visually, given that visually is your real, channel to them, making sure that they can see you, that you're thinking about how you're dressing, that you've got good sound, your background. If you have got a messy background like I have right now, I'm not in my usual office, so I have to blur the background, but being conscious of that. Also, there's a huge difference between if I'm looking at my own slide, notice where my eyes are going right now, or if I'm looking at you, right? Make sure that you are looking directly into the camera, because that is that emotional connection. Even if you've got to look away for a while, you keep maintaining that contact, because psychologically you're building a bridge, which you lose if you're looking on another screen, or you're looking down, or you're looking at yourself in the camera. So if you're both presenting, consider separate screens. So consider that you're not sitting side by side. Even if Ken and I were in the same house right now, we would not be sitting side by side. We'd have our own screen so that we could do this, right? And rehearse. Make sure you've got good handoffs, right? There's nothing worse than in the middle of the pitch, you're not sure who's saying the next thing, that you actually have it mapped out what you're going to be doing. So really thinking about this. Now, whether you're pitching virtually or face-to-face, here are the 6 things that you really need to think through. And once you get practiced at this, you and your team will have a process for this. As I said, I'm going to upload this into the chat so that you've got these. And of course, not every point here will be relevant every time. But I wanted to give you a really complete list of things to think through. Yes, is this important or not, before you pitch? And they are not in order of importance. So they're just these 6 elements. So the first one is the what. What specifically are we pitching? To get really clear on the scope of your pitch, what specifically? Are you clear in how you describe that? Is it really clear? Try that out with people. Do they get it? Do they understand what you're trying to pitch? Because remember, often you have worked with this concept for a long time before you pitch. For you, it's really clear. But can you explain it to your grandmother? Would she understand it? That's a real test. Your approach, how are you going to present? Are you going to use video? Are you going to use slides? Are you going to use flip charts? Whether you're in person or virtually, what is your approach going to be? What tools, what methodologies, what skills, and what's important to them about your approach? So this could be your approach for pitching, but also your approach for delivering the thing you're pitching. You might have a really unique way of doing things that you want to get across that separates you from other organizations or companies or studios, that you want to really get clear on what's important to them about how we do things around here. that might really matter and mean something to them. All the time, we've got to be thinking about them. What's important to them, not what's important to us. We know that, right? We know what's important to us. What is going to make them care and think? So that's the how. Who are we pitching to? How will we introduce ourselves? How will we tell them who we are? And I'll talk a little bit about introductions in a minute. Here, I think probably is one of the most important aspects is what is important to them. This is something that over and over again I see people ignore. We are really clear about what's important to us, what our values are, why we do what we do. But how much do we know about the people that we're pitching to? And when in doubt, how can we find out? How can we really understand what makes them tick, what's important to them, what will move them to say yes to us? And then also thinking about our roles in the pitch. Like at the beginning of this presentation, Ken and I, we separated. Meenakshi was really great in giving us a separate, like Ken's talking about this, Meg's talking about that. Here's who these people are, establishing credibility. Otherwise, you're thinking, who are we listening to? Why should we waste 90 minutes of our lives and so on? So we have to be really clear up front, otherwise that motivation might not be there. So really thinking about the people element. Purpose. Why are we pitching? What is our outcome? Again, something we forget is how will we know this pitch has been a success? I can't tell you how many times I see people go into meetings or pitches or conversations and they haven't thought ahead of time, how will we judge success? What will our criteria be? Is it going to be a yes for the next meeting? Is it going to be a yes to the funding? Is it an introduction we want? What do we want as the outcome? And what do they possibly want? I think we often, if we do think about outcome, we think about our own outcome. But what is a possible outcome for them? What does good look like for them out of this pitch, out of this meeting? Do we know that? How would we measure that? Is really thinking about this before. Time, when, everything to do with time. So somebody asked about how long, how quick or long, and that will really depend on a couple of things. So I'll answer that one now is, how much time are they willing to give us? How much time do we think we need to get this across? If they're going to give us a really short period of time, what might we need to do before or after the pitch to maximize that time? For example, might we want to send them something before so that they can look at it? Whether they do or not, we don't know. But if we've got to really, if that's going to be a crunch, what could we do? Can we link in with them on LinkedIn? How do we maximize that time? How will we use our time? Often we use the time up on things that aren't that valuable. So where will we spend most of our time? If we know, and do we know upfront how much time? Because often we can go into a pitch thinking we've got an hour, and then the person says, actually, you got 20 minutes. Suddenly, you've got a real problem, especially if you've used up 7 or 8 minutes on your introduction. Right. So one of the early parts I'll talk about in the beginning of the meeting is understanding, if you don't already know, understanding how long you have. And when will we follow up? So thinking about that in terms of how will you follow up and when will you follow up? And then the last one is the what if. Now, this box is very difficult to plan for because the whole nature of this piece is what about the things that we don't expect? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if one of us is sick? What if the tech goes down? What could go wrong? What if the key decision maker doesn't show up? How are we going to manage that? What are some possible things that could go wrong? Or what could really help us? Actually, if we're able to drop a name of someone that we know they're very close to, that could really help. Let's have a conversation with that person before we go into this pitch. So thinking about what could help or hinder us is really important. So all of these things, you can see, how much of these do we actually do? Sometimes we're in a little bit of a rush and we think we're just going to wing it and hope for the best. And then we leave something out. So let's now go into the beginning of a pitch, the opening of a pitch, right? Really critical moment. Introductions. Now, really important, especially in establishing, well, in all three of those, but credibility is a really key one. Also, the intimacy one, right? The warmth. And the reducing the chance of self-orientation. So be intentional about what you share. Think about, you've got a few minutes in your introduction to share a lot of information that's important, because people people typically make decisions emotionally, right? And so we've got to, in our introductions, really give the people a sense of who we are. Include what's important to you and include your strengths. So I'm going to give you an example of an introduction that I could do about myself, and then the introduction that would more closely fit with what I think is believe is best practice. So I could say to you, my name's Megan Anderson. I'm a facilitator. I'm an executive coach. I've got a coaching accreditation with the ILM coaching organization. I've been in this field. Actually, it's longer than 20 years now. I was just adding up and thinking it's embarrassing how long, but I would give the number of years. And I've worked in these industries and these countries and so on. Or I could introduce myself and say, my name is Megan Anderson. I started my career in IT, big systems implementations. And in a very short time, I became aware that I was fascinated with how you could throw millions of dollars at an IT project and the whole thing could fail. And it could fail purely because of the leadership, the people, the communication, and the lack of psychological safety with the people in the team and the way that the team worked together. So the human element could be the failing factor, even when there were budgets that were millions of dollars large. And I went into that world to work with leaders and teams because I am passionate about helping leaders and teams across all industries to become absolutely as successful as they can be and to unlock their potential, and particularly in the creative industry. So I tend to work with people who come from technical backgrounds, whether that's in the creative industry or science, who want to develop those other skills, pitching skills, engagement skills, because that is something that is really close to my heart. And that is an introduction that tells you about what I do, why I do what I do, right? And that is far more likely to connect with people. They get a sense of who I am. And then I might talk about some qualifications and things like that. The second point is so for yourself, I really recommend that you develop a 1 to 2 minute introduction that says what you do, but who and why, who you are and why you do what you do, what you love, what you're passionate about, what you're good at, what people tell you. People tell me I'm really skilled at engaging and motivating people. Think about a way that you can communicate the value that you bring that feels authentic to you. So that's really important. Then nextly, consider the culture that you're pitching to. Now, many times you might be pitching in India to a very similar cultural background, but think about how much do you know? If you're pitching overseas, how much do you know about these different cultures? Right? Some cultures are very comfortable with you talking openly about how great you are at things. Some cultures are much more toned down. The energy is toned down. The speed is toned down. See what you can do to understand the culture. And there's so much information online about this, is what might I need to adapt in my own cultural style to fit the culture so I can create that intimacy and that connection. This is where you would really understand how long do we have? what are your expectations about how long we have, and a real outline of what you're going to do. First, we're going to introduce ourselves and we'd love to hear from you. Then we're going to outline what we've brought to show you, and then we're going to stop and we're going to ask for some questions. And, so you tell them what's going to be happening in the pitch, even if it takes 10 seconds to do that. Give them an idea, right, of what's happening. Ask them what they would like to achieve. Check in. Once you've set your expectation, ask for their objectives. Is there something you'd like to achieve that we'd left out? Is really great as well. Even if they say no, carry on. You've asked, so that's important. So that's the opening. Then let's go into the running part. So this is the main body of your pitch. And obviously, depending on which sector you're in, what you're pitching is going to be different and so on. But what we want to do throughout this is maximize engagement. One of the toughest parts of a pitch is really understanding, how is this landing? Have you ever put a yes in the chat if you've ever found yourself thinking, I don't know if they like this. Do they like this? Do they not like this? It's really difficult to know, especially when you're in the flow and you're in the middle of this. And yeah. So what we want to do is we want to build into the pitch ways of getting that feedback. Now, when you are in a room with people face to face, obviously, because of the human element, this is easier. I mean, we can see if people are, shuffling around or looking at their phones. Obviously, those are not good signs. But virtually, it's really even harder, right? It's really hard. And often people, and also even if you ask people, they might not tell you specifically. So we want to look at how can we maximize engagement and get feedback in the moment. Invest time in setting up. And that setting up is what I just mentioned in the introduction. Like, take the time to do an introduction, understand who you're speaking to. Don't only be interested in introducing yourselves, also be interested in who are you pitching to, because their introductions will give you very useful information about how you might want to tailor your pitch to fit their personalities, their values and expectations, right? And be clear about expectations. So you might say, we're going to be asking you for your thoughts. So you're telling them up front, here is coming just like when I was right at the beginning of this presentation and I said, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to enter your challenges. I set that expectation. I gave you a little bit of a warning, like this is coming. And then we got some in the chat, right? So you let people use tech and non-tech. So what's quite useful is, the human element. I want to get the words into the chat, really trying to engage every 3 or 4 minutes. Now, not always easy to do, but you can see I keep returning to the chat. I keep asking you to put stuff in. And if we were in a face-to-face, we'd be stopping as well. I'd be asking for your thoughts and be asking questions. And I'm going to go into a little bit more into questions. I think that comes a little bit later when we talk about questions. But I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about how to structure your pitch in the most powerful way. And for a lot of people, this can be quite eye-opening. So I'm curious to hear if this is eye-opening for you. Is when we talk about the way people pitch. Now, we are doing this really to think about how we differentiate ourselves. So obviously, when we are talking to our pitch receivers, we're going to be talking about what we do and what we're pitching to them. The next thing we'll also be talking about is how we're going to go about doing this, because for many people, the approach that I mentioned earlier is really important. It's how you differentiate. And a lot of the time, we spend our time on these two things. This is who we are. This is what we do. We're great. We do all these different things, and this is how we do them. That's really special, and that's why you should go with us or go with our project or go with our, initiative that we are pitching. But there's one thing that we really, really forget. Now, who can think of what it is? Can anyone type into the chat? What's the thing? We talk about the what a lot, and we talk about the how we do what we do. What do we forget? And anyone type into the chat? Yes, we forget. Why do we do what we do? Why is this the thing that you have to have? And sometimes even when we talk about why, we talk about why for us. We're not aligning it with their why. Why would they want to do this? And this is something that is so important. It's probably one of the most important things. And so when we pitch, what we tend to pitch is we say, here's our project, or here's our widget, here's our concept, here it is. And this is why you should go with it. This is why it's really good and it's got all these features, and then we place it in the context. Because, of course, what we're finding in the industry is blah, 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 or what we hear is people really want this, or this and this and this is important, right? So it's similar as saying, can you imagine that, like, I wanted to sell, it's probably not going to show up very well because it's big, but say I've got this little notebook, right? I want to sell you the notebook. So I say, here's a notebook. It's a really great notebook. It's got lines. It's got a little thing to be able to mark your place and all of that. And here's why you should use it, because it's a really good idea to capture your thoughts and ideas. Because of course we're going to have ideas all the time, and you might be running around and you suddenly have an idea and you lose it. You lose your idea. So having a book is really great. Okay. That's one way of pitching, and we often use that way of pitching. What we actually want to do is we want to reverse that order. We want to reverse that order if we want to be effective. And we want to begin with the context. So here's that, just using that little silly, simple example of pitching you my little notebook. I want to say that each one of us every day has thousands of really creative ideas, and they come in and out of our heads so quickly that often it's hard to even grab hold of them and capture them and keep them in one place that we can come back. And every creative thing, as Ken mentioned earlier, every creative thing comes from somebody's brain at some point. And actually what psychologists have discovered is that given this online world that we currently live in, and the fact that a lot of the time we're typing, the lost art of writing is a really big issue, in that writing and the art of actually physically writing something unlocks a part of our brain that links directly to creativity. And that often it taps into an unconscious part of our brain that when we sit down and write without stopping, we access parts that we don't access when we start, and are typing. Right? So what I want to actually propose to you is this really simple little thing. It's a book, and it's a way of capturing your ideas. And if you then translate this into pitching your project or your initiative, and think about it, what you're doing by reversing the order, you're actually starting with the why. And why it's important, the bigger picture. Then you're narrowing it down to reasons. And that was when I was talking about the psychologist and what, the reasons. And then you say, so here's the how. Here's actually how you do this and what I'm proposing to you. So start with the why. So if I had to think about how Ken pitched Tom Gates, and for those of you who don't know, Tom Gates is a property that combines kind of a make and do craft with animation. So quite a different concept. He could have gone to broadcast and said, look, I've got this show for you, and it's part craft making and part animation. And it's bringing these two concepts together. And the reason why this is really important, blah, 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 blah. And then you could have given the bigger picture, right? The issue often is when we pitch, when we start with the what we're pitching, we don't know how the person's going to feel about it, and they might be completely turned off by it. What happens then is psychologically people go into their own heads and they start coming up with arguments as to why it won't work or why they don't like it. They switch off, which means that half of their brain isn't actually open to listening to your great reasons and your great concepts and whys and your context. Even if they're really good, they're not available to hear that because they are off in their own mind thinking, oh, what do I think about that book? Oh, no, I don't like writing. Books are for, blah, blah, blah. You've lost half of them. But if you don't tell them what exactly the solution to this is, and you start with a problem or an opportunity, that forces them to keep listening. So let's go back to the Tom Gates example. Imagine if Ken had said, right, to broadcaster, in this virtual world, parents are increasingly, especially this generation of parents, are concerned about how much screen time their children are watching. We're seeing a lot of kids lose the ability to actually create and the hand-eye coordination to actually create with their own hands. They're so used to being passengers and being entertained that they don't engage in building and making things themselves. And so we have a show that combines both of those things. We want to share with you Tom Gates, which combines the make and do, people actually kids making things and participating along in the actual program with engaging animation content. So you take people on a journey so they don't actually know what you're pitching and they have to listen all the way to the end. And they are then available and open to your great why, your context setting. They haven't switched off and they're starting to think about their phone. They have to be available for your great reasoning. They have to stay right to the end because they don't know what's coming, right? They're not turned off by the book because they're listening to all of the path towards that, if that makes sense. So I really want you to consider for the next time you pitch, if you had to start with the why, not talk about what or how, but why are you doing this? Then go into more concrete reasons and perhaps features and more specific rationale. And only right at the end say, ta-da, this is the thing that's going to meet those needs, those values. If you are able to connect that context and the reasons to the values of the group or person that you are pitching to, you significantly increase the impact and the effectiveness, which is why if you're able to find out stuff before them, what are they into? What have they done before? What does that tell us about their values? Because when it comes to pitching, we're typically quite good at communicating why we think something is important, why we like something, why we value something. But we often don't connect it with the other person's values. And we call this their currency. What will move them to say yes? And when we pitch using our currency, it's exactly the same as traveling to a different country and pulling out the money from your purse, from your own country in a shop and putting it down on the counter and trying to buy something. And the shopkeeper looks at it, says, we don't take that money here. I don't even know what that money is. Unless it's American dollars. Usually everyone takes that. But if I had to if I had to take South African rands and try and spend them in the UK, the shopkeeper will go, sorry, doesn't work. And it's exactly the same thing when we're trying to influence. So a lot of the time when we fail to influence, we are using the wrong currency. We're using something that's really important to us, but the other person is thinking, that's the wrong money. That has no value here. Take it somewhere else. So really think about now in the opening stages, when you are, this doesn't have to also happen bang, bang, bang. You could set the context, right? Set the context and say, this is what we're hearing in the world. We're hearing that parents are worried about this. We're hearing that there's a real desire to move back to analog, right? And for many parents in this generation, is that a view you share? Does that resonate? Is that something? And then you're noticing, are they nodding or are they going, no? Find out, check in. Check in. Does this thing? And then here's another thing that we're finding, blah, blah, blah. Check in. Because that way you're getting feedback all the way through the process. You know, you're assessing where you are so that you know if you're going to get surprise pushback, maybe, right? And so on. So check in. So really just switch the order, and you will notice a significant. I was running this session with a guy who had tried to pitch his project unsuccessfully 3 or 4 times to the BBC. And when he came on a session, he went, "Ah, that's exactly what I do. I tell them why it's so important, and it's all about me." He switched it round, and the very next time he went in, he got a commission. And he just said, "I cannot believe it. I told them the same information, but I switched the order." Very big, profound impact. As I mentioned, you want to be asking questions. Here are some top tips for asking questions when you are virtually. Ask open questions. Now, can anyone tell me in the chat what is an open question versus a closed question? Or let's say, what is a closed question? Because that's probably the easiest one to answer in the chat. What is a closed versus an open question? So really, one of the most useful skills that you can develop. Yes, Prajval is absolutely right. A closed question you can answer with a yes or no. Now, closed questions in pitches are really not very helpful because they tell you nothing about what the person is thinking. Do you like it? Yes or no? Will this work? Yes or no? You don't really get below the surface on why do they have that view, which is the thing that you really want to know. So when you ask questions, ask people questions that begin with the words. There are 5 open questions. Can anyone type into the chat what you think those open questions start with? And I'll give you a clue. It starts with the letter W, all of them except one. Who can type into the chat, what do open questions start with? What? Correct. And actually, a big clue is that preparation diagram. Yeah, that I gave you earlier. What, how, why, who, would, what, where, when. Exactly. Who, what, where, when, why, how. All W's except for the how. All of the others are W's. If you ask a question that starts with one of those words, it is guaranteed to be an open question. How do you feel about this? We'll give you so much more information so that if you are rejected, you know why. How do you feel? What do you like? What do you not like? That will bring out the person's currency, right? What the killer question that I think is probably in the whole English language or human language is the most useful question that you ever could ask is the question, and I'm actually going to type it into the chat. What's important to you about X? Fill in the blank with your thing, whatever your thing is. What's important about this show? What's important about companies you work with? What's important about this project? What's important? You will elicit their currency. That is how you elicit currency. Also, if you call on people by name, you're more likely in a virtual environment to get questions. So if I was asking, if nobody was answering any of my questions, I might say, so Meenakshi, what do you think about this? Or I might say, so Ken, I'm going to ask you in a minute this other question. If you and you say the name before you ask the question. It's very different from saying, what do you think about this question, Pramod? Pramod suddenly will have a heart attack, right? But if I say, Pramod, I'm going to ask you a question, and it's going to be this question, then I've alerted Pramod to the question. Then he can listen, and then he can answer. So if you say the name before the question, you encourage people to share, and you reduce the chance of them suddenly getting a fright. And if a big group like we are now, I would direct to chat, which is exactly what I'm doing. And that's about asking questions. So also thank people for contributing, especially if in a big group, because you'll get more contribution, and acknowledge things that people have said in the chat. Gauging interest. I have mentioned to you to ask questions, but this is a great way to ask for feedback. So if at the beginning of your pitch, you're going to say to them, we're going to ask for your feedback, then ask for feedback all round. Ask what worked. What did you like about that? What didn't work? What did you not like as much? They might say, well, we liked it all, let's hope. But if they have got things that have not landed with them so well, it's much better for you to know that. Well, what we didn't like so much was this and this and this part. Okay. Then you know what you are dealing with. And then the third part is to say, so what would make this better? That way, when you pitch, even if they don't accept your pitch, you have got absolutely valuable information to take to the next one. Or if you had to make a correction and pitch back, or if there were things that you could do, instead of just saying, did you like it? What do you think? Yeah, yes, no. This way, you're going to get much more quality feedback, and that will improve and enhance how you do things. A great temperature check. If you are really short of time in a very big group, you could ask for a thumbs up, sideways, or down. So yes, not sure, no. You could ask people to do that virtually or in chat. And then you could also, if you're gauging overall interest and it's difficult for you to really tell how much they liked something, sometimes people find it hard to say, actually, we really didn't like that. They don't want to hurt your feelings, or say to them, if 10 was excellent, yes, we're signing you up now. And 1 and 0 was no way, not interested. What would you give this right now? Ask them to give you a rating. Again, hugely. So these are a number of different ways that you can gauge. You could send this to them afterwards. You could send this to them. You could ask them in the actual pitch. But don't be shy about saying, what do you think? Let's talk about what you liked, what you didn't like. Make it okay for them to share their thoughts. Make it comfortable. Make it, yeah. And here's the last really big topic that I want to cover, and that is objections. Right? You're in the middle of the pitch. They mention something that they really don't like. Oh, that's not going to work for us because of this, or we don't like that, or that time frame doesn't work, or we've already got lots of things like this and we're not interested, or we've already just signed with a partner. Objections when pitching can really throw us off course, right? And they can make our hearts start to race and our palms get sweaty and our throat get dry. And typically what happens is when someone says that, we feel compelled to respond immediately and to convince them about why they should not think the way they think. All right? They say, oh, this is very like a project we are at. No, 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 no. It's not very like, no, this is very different because, and we jump in. All right? I'm going to teach you a technique that allows you to calm your state down, right? Stop your heart from racing so much. Get back in control of yourself and of the situation, and really get underneath why they have that objection or concern. And objections can take many different forms. An objection can be a statement, or it could just be not saying very much, and they're not even speaking. And you're thinking, I don't even know what they think, right? So let's say somebody has given an objection, right? No, we've got lots of things just like that. We're not really interested. The very first thing you must do is acknowledge their objection. And you do that by playing back what you have heard. So if they've said to you, no, sorry, we've got a lot of things just like that, you need to say, so it sounds like you've already got a lot of similar projects. Is that right? Yeah, that's what you're saying. Phrase it as a question. You want to summarize. You want them to do this. Yeah. Firstly, you're checking in with, have you understood correctly? Secondly, you are building that emotional connection. You are demonstrating that you really have heard. Thirdly, you're buying yourself a bit of time, because sometimes this can take you by surprise and you're thinking, oh no, now what? So you acknowledge and you wait for the yes or the nod. When you see a nod, you know that you have done a really good acknowledge. You're not saying, oh, I understand, but never use the word but. Never use the word but. Always use the word and. So it sounds like you've got a lot of similar things, right? Yes. Then ask. You want to ask them those open questions. Ah, okay. Tell us more. Tell us about those other things. Tell us what you're currently working on. Tell us how, in what way is it the same? Here you are pulling information, right? You are going under the surface of so you are finding out what's important to them. What's their currency? What does good look like? What would there maybe, is there a chance that they maybe, perhaps what they are describing are things that are not exactly like your thing? You spot an opportunity, but you are in listening mode. You are not in telling mode. You are in listening. You are pull, right? Exploring. What, why, how, when, where, who, all of those. You might find out that you have no chance, right? You might find out from that or you might find a little gap. So thank you for sharing all those projects. We can see why you would say that you have a lot of similar things. Here's how we think our thing is different. The third step is address or act or answer. It's when you get to speak again, right? Address the objection, link it to their values, their currency. So you mentioned that you chose all those other projects because of this, and this. And those are absolutely things that are important to us. Here's how our thing gives you all of that plus even more. But you don't go for the third step, which is to counter the objection until you have acknowledged and asked, only then. Because guess which one of these steps, as human beings, we typically jump to first. Somebody says, I don't really like that, or sounds like that's going to be really hard. No, it's not going to be hard. It's not going to be hard. Yes. We jump in with the answer. And what happens is we end up like this. They put an objection and we end up, but instead, if we go, okay, tell us this, and we pull them towards us. Tell us, we've got a project already that we really like. What do you really like? Tell us, because that is telling the values, right? So this is how you address objections. And then lastly, closing. Close well. Close strong. Summarize where you've got to. Agree the next step. So we're going to get back to you, or we're going to send you this, or when can we expect an answer, or what do you need next from us? What is going to happen in this process? Thank them for their time, and then make sure that you build that reliability by following up and sending what you said you were going to send, or following up when you send, otherwise the trust that we started with goes down. So those are the steps.